Philadelphia police have arrested 2 men who traveled with guns from out of state to the site of the city's vote counting center. The FBI had received a tip about an armed group traveling from Virginia on Thursday night. 2 men were detained for gun possession without proper licensing. Other charges are pending. Police also seized the same silver Hummer they believe was described in the tip, where they found an AR rifle and approximately 160 rounds of ammunition. It comes just a day after law enforcement officers in Arizona, dressed in full tactical gear, guarded the counting facility in Phoenix. They also escorted employees through the peaceful but heavily armed crowd of protesters to their cars once their shift was over. Now, these are isolated incidents, we want to emphasize, but tensions do remain high as President Trump repeats false claims that he won the presidential election and saying without evidence that Democrats are trying to take victory away from him.
We think we will win the election very easily. We think there's going to be a lot of litigation because we have so much evidence, so much proof, and it's going to end up perhaps at the highest court in the land. We'll see. But we think there'll be a lot of litigation because we can't have an election stolen like this.
And Fran Townsend joins me now. She is a former Homeland Security advisor to President George W. Bush. Fran, I'm so grateful you could join us with your depth of experience and expertise. I want to start with this. Sources close to the president tell our Paula Reed that there is no centralized strategy to the Trump campaign's legal fight, and that most of the litigation is performative. What's your initial reaction to these claims by the president?
Elaine, thank you for having me. I really do think that this is a throw everything up against the wall and see if anything sticks. The president's got his path to the presidency now to reelection is narrowing every day. And I think that the litigation that they're filing is really a tactic to delay what appears now to be the inevitable election of Vice President Biden.
Well, we saw recently, Fran, federal officials stop what they say was an alleged plot to kidnap the governor of Michigan over lockdown orders. And I wonder more broadly, in this kind of climate, what effect do you think the president's rhetoric could have domestically?
Elaine, I worry about this because, as you know, we've seen in New York, all the stores up and down Madison Avenue and Fifth Avenue are boarded up because the police commissioner here has expected violent protests and looting. We've seen some protests. There's been some isolated incidents of violence, but I think people are waiting to see how it all shakes out. We don't have a declared winner in the election yet, but I think that people are on edge in the sense of, if the president doesn't honor the outcome of the election, if it is in fact true that Vice President Biden does have the votes and President Trump does not honor that result, I think then you may see violence. People in this country expect, regardless of whether your candidate wins or loses, that there is a peaceful transition of power and a respect for the process. And to the extent that the president's rhetoric suggests that he will not respect the process and the outcome unless he's the victor, that I think we ought to expect. People will not stand for that in this country. We are not a third world country. We do not steal elections. We do not stuff ballot boxes. And so I think that the American people will not tolerate that. And I think people are on edge because of the president's rhetoric.
Fran, I want to read a quote from the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, which sent international election observers to the U.S. They found no evidence of fraud and called the election, quote, competitive and well managed, despite logistical challenges posed by the pandemic. But they single out President Trump, saying baseless allegations of systemic deficiencies, notably by the incumbent president, including on election night, harm public trust in democratic institutions. Fran, what do America's adversaries see or hear when a sitting American president undermines the electoral process?
Well, we know from 2016, Elaine, that was exactly the covert strategy of the Russian government. That is to undermine American confidence in our electoral process, our democratic process. And so for the president to pick up that theme 4 years later and sort of coming from the White House, from his bully pulpit, if you will, to undermine the democratic process is really disturbing, frankly. Look, it's less important, the outcome, than that we all believe that my vote counts, your vote counts. Everybody's vote ought to be, those who took the time to go and vote, their vote matters and it counts. And so for the president to suggest that there's some corruption in the system very much weakens our democracy. And I think that's what Americans take away from that. I think it's why they're on edge and why they're resentful. We want to know what the outcome was. We want it to be free and fair, and then we want to move on from it, just as we always do.
Do you think America's enemies see this as an opportunity, this moment that we're in right now?
I think the longer it drags on, the more dangerous it becomes. Between now and Inauguration Day, regardless of who's elected, the more consternation we see, our adversaries see, the more likely it is they may seek to take advantage of it.
Well, in a previous life, as you know, I covered President Bush when you were his Homeland Security advisor. And I know he and the Bush family felt very strongly that a former president should not ever criticize a sitting president. At the same time, President Bush expressed a deeply held belief in democracy and the principles of democracy. And I wonder, Fran, do you think that he might speak out? Why or why not?
You know, Elaine, I don't expect him to speak out. Not because, as you say, he and the Bush family believe deeply in the principles of democracy and the honor of serving. But having said that, the president has been very quiet throughout the 2016 race. He's been very quiet regarding the president's tweets and his own behavior. I don't think President Bush, will speak out now any more than he was reluctant to before. He really does believe that former presidents should exit the stage gracefully and allow their successors to govern. And so I do not expect President Bush will speak out.
All right, Fran Townsend. Fran, very good to have you with us tonight. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.